Welcome, everyone, here at Brainwash Festival for probably your next or maybe your first session of the day. It's lovely to see so many open and curious ecological beings here in the room and maybe also online for what promises to be a weird and wonderful conversation. My name is Julien. I'm an ecological thinker, activist, and it's truly a pleasure to welcome with you here tonight to the room none other than Professor Timothy Morton.
Hello, Amsterdam.
Yes. Now, Professor Morton, Tim, I'm looking, I think, in the camera at you right there. Welcome. It's truly a pleasure to have you here. Now, before we start cracking, let me introduce you to the audience for a moment, as is our want. So Tim is Rita Shea Guffey Chair of English at Rice University in Houston, Texas. He's collaborated with the likes of Björk, Laurie Anderson, Sabrina Scott, Adam McKay, Olafur Eliasson, and even Pharrell Williams. They co-wrote and appear in Living in the Future's Past, a 2018 film on climate change, together with Jeff Bridges. They're the author of the libretto of the opera Time, Time, Time by Jennifer Walsh, and really a ton of books. Most recently, All Art is Ecological, as well as Being Ecological, Humankind, Solidarity with Non-Human People, Dark Ecology for a Logic of Future Coexistence, Nothing, 3 Inquiries in Buddhism, Hyperobjects, Philosophy and Ecology at the End of the World, Ecology Without Nature and Others, as well as over 250 essays on philosophy, ecology, literature, music, art, architecture, design, food, and I'm sure many other things. So again, it's a great pleasure to have you here, Tim. So what will we be up to for the coming hour? We'll be exploring our ecological being with Tim along 4 big themes. And as you might know, Tim is as comfortable in an underground techno club as he is in a new wave dive bar, and that's why we'll be introducing all these themes with a soundtrack. We could say a post-Anthropocene soundtrack. And Tim, a word to the wise, I won't be throwing questions at you in a straight line like a Major League Baseball pitcher, expecting you to whack them out of the field. I want to try to do it a little bit more lame tonight, be a bit lackadaisical, lob up some balls for you to kind of talk to us about what's going down. So that's what we're planning to do.
I really can't think properly, so thank you very much for that.
Yeah, we'll let you roam about. Yeah. So let's get cracking and go straight to the meat of the matter, Tim, and talk about ecology and being ecological. And as promised, we'll do so by starting with a track.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some Detroit techno legends to get us started. So, Tim, your work really came together for me when I started thinking about you as the eco party starter, right? You're always talking about the phenomenology, the feeling, the vibe of being ecological, about being part of the biosphere. And you've compared this vibe to like a religious experience, to being maybe the basis also for spiritual feelings, this kind of biospheric vibe, right? So shall we start at that?
That makes you the best
experience.
interviewer of all time.
Sorry?
That makes you into being the best interviewer ever.
That's a great start. Thanks for that. So being ecological, with all these poundings, these rhythms, these vibrations, Are we ecological simply because we're alive?
Oh, for real, of course. And the thing is, okay, so a lot of people like me try to talk in a kind of religious way, but like in a bad way and probably not deliberately, right? So for example, you look at page 1 of the newspaper and basically it's the book of Revelations. I mean, it doesn't say giant dragon comes out of ocean, but it does say things like that, right? About the climate, stuff that you can't even understand, let alone deal with. So basically, the first page 1 is you're stupid and powerless. Then you open to the middle of the paper, and somebody, codename Eeyore, is basically telling you that you're evil and that you don't understand this right and that you've been doing it all wrong. And from my point of view, stupid and evil is not a good place from which to launch any kind of politics. But there's another way of being religious, right? Which is the kind of the esoteric way of being religious. And I think it kind of says something very true about being a life form, actually. Because this funny feeling that we have, you know, it's just out of reach, you know. If you've ever studied any religion, you've been on a meditation retreat or whatever that is, this tantalizing quality of I can't grasp it, which all of the manuals all around the world basically say is grasping it. I think it's pretty simple. Brain signals always arrive a little tiny bit late, don't they? And so literally your experience of the biosphere is a tiny little bit out of phase with it. And then you can, you know, turn it into religion and objectify it and say this is the object and this is the subject and just basically blow it for everybody and like incite the philosophical version of planet death. Or you can kind of realize that you don't need to change one tiny thing about the way you think or feel about things. You don't need to get into some special ecological mood. It's a little bit like if you've ever taught something, right? Like you don't have to be a teacher because you are a teacher. Somebody in the room knows that you're the teacher. By the way, this is what I'm relying on because I've got nothing, guys. All I've got are these sort of hypnotic or crazy hand gestures and some things that I say. And I'm trusting you to think that I'm really smart and clever. Please do.
Let's follow up on that with a complex question. Okay, you know, we're in the biosphere, we're of the biosphere, we're within the biosphere somehow. But what does that mean for the relation of us, our bodies, to sort of our environment, right? Because it's kind of weird to say that you're in something because that implies you could also be outside of it, could be separate from it. And that's kind of like a complex situation. A lot of the ecofeminists that I think would talk about that in terms of responsibility with the hyphen in between, right? To kind of talk about like non-violence, about care, as something that means that you're part of the biosphere. And you talk about this in terms of tuning or being attuned to. So could you explain to us a little bit more what it means to be attuned to or in tune with the environment?
Yes, right on. So let's just for a minute, though, talk about the word in. You know, the best way to be in something is to be into something, right? Like spatially measurable in is because you're into whatever that is that you're in, right? And so the point is that you're into the world, you're into the biosphere, right? Even when Elon Musk goes to Mars, please hurry up, he's going to be into the biosphere because he's going to have to make one again. He's going to have a worse problem in a way than we have, us poor people down on Earth, that he's escaped. But he thinks he's escaping the biosphere, or maybe like, so tape measure wise, he's escaping the biosphere, but let's use a fancy word, phenomenologically, he's still in it, right? So that's in, yeah. Everything is vibrating, right? There's a quantum theory tells us everything is vibrating, and in a funny way, life is a huge, big biograph of quantum theory stuff, right? Because if quantum theory wasn't true, I would just dissolve into a cloud of powder, right? The fact that, funnily enough, the fact that I seem to be solid and vaguely the same as I was yesterday is because of quantum theory, right? And quantum theory is telling us that everything is vibrating, everything has a frequency and an amplitude, right? And so literally, when things are relating to one another, they're always resonating with each other. It's not that there's resonating and no resonating, it's that there's always resonating. And then there's people like me who like to tell you that it isn't that way.
I guess this is the sense in which you've said that it's not too hard to be ecological, but it's actually too easy, right? It's so easy that we somehow like miss the point of it and end up where we are now in let's say, a complex situation.
This is so similar, actually, also to esoteric religion. And again, I'm thinking that religion is the phenomenology of the biosphere, actually. It's all the lovely stuff about being a life form, and in particular, a primate, you know, kind of turned inside out and pushed up there, you know. And all of the esoteric manuals all say, look, it's too easy to realize that you are actually this God-like being. You know, it's too easy to love yourself and other humans and other life forms. Let's make it really complicated for ourselves and try and think of them as objects, therefore slaves, therefore manipulable, therefore, oh dear, we've burned them to death.
Yeah, you said once that it's the fatal certainty with which we erase, I hope I'm quoting you right, with which we erase the weird vagueness of being that where we went wrong. So does that mean, Tim, to be ecological, that we somehow have to kind of like exit that modern space of fatal certainty that so many people and other persons have already borne the brunt of?
We will find that we have exited it, but I'm trying to push the fact that there's nothing special that we have to do. You don't have to think special thoughts or believe special things or whatever. You just have to notice something that's actually true, scientifically true, and the way in which it's true is, you know, the good bit of religion. So what's not to like about taking care of global warming? Because in reality, since it's the biggest problem on the planet, it is therefore the sexiest, most wonderful, most incredible, it should get you out of bed in the morning thing to care about.
That's an uplifting message. Thanks. If I can just push back a little on that, right? Because I'm really enthusiastic about this. I feel the vibe. I'm at the party, but then I go back home and I get stuck with the hangover. I'm like, wait, this was supposed to be easy, but it's so bloody hard. Where am I going wrong? So, what's the practice of that? Like Buddhists, right? It's all about the practice. What's the practice of that simplicity?
So I wake up in the morning, just about, Chris, and my first thoughts are always about, you know, crop failure and famine and even white guys having all the fun of Ethiopians in the late 80s, you know, like, you know, in a horrible way. If the whole world becomes Ethiopia, then there's no way to do Live Aid. So let's not do that, right? So I'm thinking about this because I talk about it a lot, and then I get out of bed and I come into the kitchen, which is here, and I make breakfast for my kids and I take them to school, and guess what I don't do? I don't do this religious Eeyore, you're evil, this is terrible, you're paralyzed thing, that I don't bring my hangover mind to the game. You know, it's not about, again, it's not about doing something special. It's just about like making sure you're doing what you do with everything. You know, like you don't come in the kitchen and get all freaked out about other stuff. So why are we still freaking ourselves out about what should be the most sexy, wonderful, exciting, incredible thing to take care of ever? Like in the 3 million years of us type beings being on this earth thing. This is the big one.
Isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so let's hold on to that energy, but then move from ecology to philosophy and dig a little bit into your philosophical framework or thinking that's somehow underneath or beside part of the notion of being ecological. And obviously we have to introduce that with some Björk.
Ooh.
To
So another Björk that maybe some of us are used to, in a subtle abuse remix, some more maybe Detroit or Chicago tradition coming in there. Maybe not your choice, but our suggestion, because as the myth goes, Tim, somehow you came up with this notion of hyperobjects, one of your influential terms, listening to this track. Is this myth correct, or is this like an urban myth?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, hyper ballad is the first was the thing on my mind when I was thinking about what do you call all of the polystyrene ever, right? Like for 5 minutes, maybe it's a cup, right? And then you crumple it, and then you throw it away, and then it goes somewhere, you know. And there's this, like, imagine all of it, and for as long as it lasts, like, what is the word for that? And so, oh, hyper ballad, hyper object, you know. And that's kind of how it went. And of course, this is a song that is actually also a hyper object version of being in love, right? It's all the bits and pieces, all the nasty bits of being in love with somebody, all in a huge big pile, including yourself as one of these things in this pile, and then you throw yourself off the cliff, you know. And the beauty of that mix is at the end. Highly recommended to listen to it on YouTube Music or whatever. There is the when she says, "I wonder what I would look like when I see myself down there at the bottom of the cliff. Will my eyes be closed or open? Closed or open?" And it repeats, closed or open, and it repeats so much that it kind of phases into the music. It's beautiful.
Amazing. So you've covered a lot of ground, I think, since hyperobjects, more or less 10 years ago that the book came out. Lots of people, I still remember the moment that somebody handed it to me with the sort of the ice cap, with all the, it's a very sort of ominous, I think, book and title. So maybe as a way for us to get a little bit more into the philosophical dimension of your thought, could you explain sort of what is a hyperobject, talk a bit more about that, and then take us through to where you're at now? What kind of big moments have you had, kind of big movements have you made in your thinking?
Right on. So a hyperobject is something physical, yeah. It's something physical that's so big and long-lasting that you can only see little bits of it at a time. Even if you're using powerful computers, you can probably only model climate change, for example, in real time using terahertz of RAM processing speed. Last time I checked, it requires that to do it. So even with a supercomputer, it's hard to see all of it all at once, right? You live in the biosphere, you are a biosphere, you are the extension of the biosphere. And so, you know, you can't, literally you can't see it all at once, right? Because you can't see yourself kind of seeing it, right? There's so many phenomena like that in the world. Where have I gone since then? I've decided, now that I'm the tender age of 54, that philosophy is actually not about having big ideas. I kind of stopped having big ideas and I started trying not to have big ideas. I think you get a bit confused in your 20s. You think philosophy is about, you know, having the biggest idea in the world. I wonder where some men get this idea from. And then they compare the size of their ideas to other people's. And that's basically a lot of philosophy books, isn't it? And that's why nobody wants to read them. So it's terrible, but there's things that come out of my mouth so bad.
So from hyperobjects to 1,000 little things, Tim.
Right, and then just like philosophy means love and wisdom, right? And so it's two emotions roughly. So it's not nothing about ideas in it, and it's kind of like you're driving down the wisdom street in the love mobile. And the lamp posts down the street are called ideas, and you do not want to point your love mobile at the lamp post because it's going to hit it and get into. So the point is to not have the idea, right? The point is actually the movement is the point. I'm a huge, big movement fan, as you can tell, because I'm always standing up when I'm doing this kind of thing.
Yeah. So we're cruising along.
Yeah. Or sort of falling, collapsing, slipping, hurting myself. Mostly it's slipping, getting into terrible accidents.
Well, with that, I think, Tim, I'm just going to move ahead to the next topic. Let's just trash philosophy and go on to activism for now. It's maybe a bit heavier, but I'm sure you'll also bring it back to this weird balance of heavy and light. Also, speaking as an activist, you know, like in the global north, where only now, I think, thanks to people like you and many others, rediscovering that we're ecological beings, rediscovering that we're part of the biosphere and not simply kind of in it when we choose and out of it when we want to be sciencey or objective about it. But meanwhile, the world is dying all around us. So what to do? And to just get into that vibe for a moment, let's listen to Anoni.
It's only 4 degrees, it's only 4 degrees. 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 World, I wanna see it boil. I wanna see this world, I wanna see it boil. It's only 4 degrees, it's only 4 degrees. It's only 4 degrees, it's only 4 degrees. I wanna burn them, I wanna burn them. I wanna burn them, I wanna burn them. I wanna burn the sky, I wanna burn the breeze. I wanna see the animals die in the trees. Let's go, it's only 4 degrees. Let's go, it's only 4 degrees. I wanna burn them.
If all of the unconscious actions and motivations in the world could speak, that's what they would be saying, right?
Isn't it? Yeah,
That's
it just brings together these two very different movements, right, that are coming together. Yeah, quite an intense song about this really threatening thing, 4 degrees. If anybody who reads the newspapers has heard a lot of these kinds of numbers the past few days, and you've always been saying for a couple of years, no information dump. This is not the way to get ahead to solve this problem. Because it's kind of speaking down to people. You were just saying so, right? It's all these science
Well, I
effects.
think also it's speaking down, but I think also it's freezing people. And I think also we can talk to each other about 4 degrees. We can talk to each other about, we would love it not to be the Triassic period, in the near future, and to have mass extinction really badly. It's happening now, But how to talk to each other about it in a way that's caring, rather than a way that's like we're assaulting ourselves and giving ourselves PTSD. Yeah. We don't talk to ourselves about anything else in such a shocking, intense way. And I think part of the problem is understandable because this is so big that we're all reduced to tiny, tiny babies. The last time we were this small in relation to a problem, and literally grown-ups from Exxon are committing crimes in front of us as we watch. And we feel powerless. And so it's perfectly understandable that this is where people would go with it.
Yeah. Can you talk more about the fact, I found this like, how shall I put it, maybe seductive or convincing in a non-intellectual way, but also very puzzling when you said that the challenge is that we need to feel more, but maybe understand less. Mm-hmm. What's up with that?
Yeah, I think the trouble is, what's up with that? Explain yourself, yeah. Professor Morton.
Unconfuse me.
Yeah, well, so an idea is a feeling from the past, very roughly. All these words that we have are from the past. And we need new words. For example, the word subject, which basically correlates to the word master, and the word object, which basically correlates to the word slave. We need new words, right? And feelings are ideas from the future, aren't they? Like, why else do you go to therapy? You're having a feeling because you don't understand yet. So of course the feeling is a symptom of something in the past, but it's something that you do not yet understand, and so you confront it as the future, right? So you should sort of like, I'm very against the idea that feelings and thoughts are different, and I think like Obi-Wan, and maybe philosophers should sound a bit more like Obi-Wan or Yoda at this point. You know, you should trust your feelings, right? Like Generation Z, who I talk to a lot, like for some reason they've hired me, Just Stop Oil, as the sort of old guy art director guy, as of last week, because I love this action so much about the soup. And I was able to explain it to myself, and then they talked about it with me, and it was just so great it almost could have been out of the Tim Morton playbook, you know. But the interesting thing is about that, I didn't understand it at first. And then I realized, oh, this feeling of I can't understand it is the point. It's like trying to interrupt. Activism at that scale is trying to interrupt you, right? It's trying to stop you, like, with something incomprehensible. And you know what the most beautiful part of that action is? The meaninglessness, right? It's super difficult because you're young and you're tender and you care and your heart is in the right place and you're full of anger, justifiably. And so there's every reason in the world to forget the most important thing that always gets things done. Just talk to the Sex Pistols, the menacing grin. The menacing grin, guys. Don't forget the meaningless menacing grin when you're trying to do an action. Don't let the fascists colonize the sphere of meaninglessness. Imperialism is always about, like, when you're an imperial power, you do things like, I can do nonsense language now. I am the very model of a modern major general, or the, you know, Dr. Seuss books and the nuclear bomb, right? So therefore, whoever controls the nonsense controls the world, right? So don't stop. Activists, please listen very carefully. Don't stop this meaninglessness aspect of what you're doing. I understand the pressure when the journalist is putting a mic in your face to say something like that. But remember what the Sex Pistols did when they got that themselves, right? Joe Grundy was feeling up Susie Sue in the green room. It was a genuine Me Too moment. And then he said, say something, go on, say something rude. So they said, you dirty fucker, on live TV. 15 minutes later, the Sex Pistols were everywhere. This action with the Van Gogh, even Americans, stupid me, American me, understood this action. And like it came across to us, right? And it needs to come across to us because we need to model being this so that all the Chinese people can do it, right? So you need to like educate us how to disport ourselves, right? And part of it is, you know, you're going to get through to people if you do, you know, like George Bush said, I am the decider, goo 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 joob. You know, like that's the level we need the. For me, this was ecological activism's Sex Pistols moment.
Right.
You know, my dad was on the Great Rainbow Warrior. He used to stop whaling vessels. It's like, well, okay, great, that's great, morally good. It's got 1 degree of freedom. That's it. That's the only thing you did. Soup on a Van Gogh painting. It's multivalent. Why?
Isn't it?
Because there's a huge ball bearing in the middle. And what is this ball bearing? Total nonsense.
So Tim, I'm going to really remember this. We're going to come back to soup when we talk about art and talk about what that means for art. I'm interested. But for now, we shouldn't give the nonsense away to the fascists, I think you said. Maybe that's a wisdom to live by, but let's talk more about that.
Whoever controls the nonsense controls the world, people.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Right? Never forget that. An old guy told you.
Speaking of old guys, I want to take this thinking one step further and bring in a favorite philosopher, thinker of mine, Felix Guattari, a radical psychoanalyst, activist, thinker, who was talking a lot about ecosophy, so the love of ecology or of life. And he has this really provocative quote from Gregory Bateson at the top of his book, The Three Ecologies, which says, there's an ecology of bad ideas, just as there's an ecology of weeds. And then later in the book from '89, he goes on to describe Trump in '80s New York as an algal bloom that's kind of spreading through the city, right? So there's this weird situation where ecology and problems can actually be the same thing. So I'm wondering, is it enough to be ecological? What to do about the weeds?
Well, you know, we are sort of responsible in a embarrassing and irritating way for how we dream. That's what I'm seeing in that, right? we're kind of responsible for it. But again, I'd like to de-emphasize a little bit the how-to part.
Okay.
Because when you hear how-to, it suggests that tomorrow you got to wake up on Halloween with a totally new or changed way of thinking and being. People so easily get the wrong end of the stick there, and the how is dropping something. It's much easier to drop it, right, than to find. You're not even trying to find a new concept. You're just trying to do what your body wants to do, which is, be a loving, caring, sensitive chameleon being who can take on empathetically and otherwise the coloration of all of the wonderful surfaces that you're on or in or around or about. Yeah, and so, yeah, in a way, but the trouble is that, thinking about ideas like that, and it kind of like gets me into a bit of a religious tangle. I know what he's saying, but I'm just going to kind of not do it.
Okay.
Sorry, Felix.
I think he'll forgive you. Working as he did a lot with schizophrenics and groups of crazy people, I think he has a wide range of acceptance for attitudes. So, I think, with all due respect, dear Tim, I think one of the key issues for when it comes to activism, and you've written a lot about this, is this question of the individual and the system, and maybe even starting the conversation that way, you're trapped. But still, I want to raise the issue. You've talked about the problem of heaps. You always have these great talks about the problem with heaps. How many stones is a heap? 3 stones, 4 stones, and when is it just the stones? The idea that an ecology or an ecosystem is always less than its parts, right? So, in climate activism space, there's a lot of talk about tipping points. On the one hand, there are these horrendous ultra factoids that are the most scary things you can imagine coming up towards us. We don't even know when they're going to happen. Ice sheet collapse of ecosystems, ocean currents suddenly shifting. There are these hyperobjects that we can't touch but can feel the threat of. But on the other hand, you also have positive tipping points. You also have societal tipping points where attitudes, norms, cultures can suddenly flip into a different mode. So I wonder if you could talk to us about this relationship, or reframe for us even this relationship between the individual and the system, and maybe tease in a tipping point somewhere if you feel that's relevant.
Slip in a tipping point if you can. Well, I want to immediately again sort of say the trouble for me is that, okay, so tipping point is a scientific concept. The trouble with tipping point, the way we hear it, is repent, because metanoia in Greek means tipping point. Metanoia is Greek for repentance. It means you flipped your mind around, right? Wow. So again, I don't know if I'm into mental tipping point, actually. But the point about being a human being is that there's so many of us. There's only one global warming. Why do you think they need passports and state police, right? Why do you think the Netherlands and America need that? Because there's only one of it. And there's millions and millions of us, right? The whole is always less than the sum of its parts. And I know that sounds weird, but what's amusing is it's absolutely simply and fantastically always the case, right? A lorry is there's always one lorry, and there's always lots of things in the lorry, including the driver. The parts are more than the whole. It's incredibly easy to understand, but really strange, because it's like we've been gaslighting ourselves into the fascist version, right? Which is what we've got on the fascist version of what? Holism, right? You have to believe in wholes to be into ecology. You have to be a holist, right?
Yeah.
What kind of holism? The fasces, which are the big bundle of sticks that the eagle is holding, the American eagle, that's fascism, right? The stick bundle. You're part of this gang called the fasces, right? Like, you only get your strength from being in this gang. You mean nothing unless you're part of this gang, right? That's the fascist view. And, when we say the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, that's what that means. It means you get your identity from something that is ontologically bigger than you, that bestows upon you graciously your identity in the group. And, change and the way things can kind of melt and change and stuff, time itself would be impossible unless little tiny baggies could fall out of larger baggies with lots and lots of goodies in those baggies. Just to say baggies for a minute. Can I say baggies?
Baggies. Baggies, baggies, baggies.
Baggies.
Right, so fascism is believing that there's just the one bag and it's my bag and I'm in it and nobody else can get my bag, right?
Yeah, and I'm nothing. All I do is hit retweet because I'm nothing. I'm a zombie pod person. All I need to do, that's the trouble with fascism. It's acephalic, it's automatic, it just works. And it's the default of capitalism, unfortunately. So if we're going to have like capitalism, which we do, and eco-transition, we have got to defascicize the holism right now for all kinds of political, wonderful reasons, as well as like logical, philosophical, and biological reasons, right? So you can be a holist, which is but full of all kinds of lovely things that are always bigger than the whole, because there's always more of them. There's so many more of us talking of activism than there are of them, right? It's your basic Percy Shelley, Mask of Anarchy, non-violent direct action, Martin Luther King, inspiring poem for Gandhi thing to think, right? Ye are many, they are few. Right. Is the last line of that poem, right? Like that is the point, right? There's so much more of it. That's why they require the violence, because they're very fragile. There's only one of them.
Maybe that brings us to art, Tim, and to move beyond the rationalistic sort of analytic spaces and say, like, well, where do we get this vibe from?
There's one painting, right? There's one painting, and there's a million different things in that painting, and there's a million different ways of seeing that painting. Yeah. And there's a million different interactions with that painting, right?
It's a bag full of eyes looking back at you, right? I think you wrote once.
That's exactly. That's my favorite. That's how I like to spend my Sunday afternoon.
These crazy Timothy Morton images bouncing around in your head. It's always a pleasure. So let's listen to some more music. Let's get back in the vibe. This is one you selected for us, Church Girl. Lovely, a bit of 80s pop vibes to balance out all the techno. Dancing with the Devil on Your Back, how can we do that? Like any great pop song, you know, a well-put idea can really like keep circling in your head, and some of yours really do in mine. And one you already touched upon before, I wanna get back to is this idea that feelings are from the future, and somehow art seems to be like a medium or like a vessel to work with that. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
For real, very simple indeed, actually. Although it sounds profound and complicated, and it is profound, but it's not complicated, right? So you don't know what this means yet, right? You don't know what it means yet. So whenever you look at it, you're looking at the future. That's the future. Right? Also, incidentally, this is the future, but you think you know what this means, right? Human being, white, male, whatever subject, well, you think this, you know what this means. You don't know what this means, but actually you don't know what this means either. But in our culture, we have this special space for this, that we don't know what it is yet. And so literally art is the future. It's not just pointing to the future, it is the future, right? And so the need desperately to imagine that the future can be different from the past because it's scientifically correct, because we live in a quantum universe, philosophically true, morally fantastic, and a great way to spend your day thinking that tomorrow will be different from now because we're munching the planet down to nothing. But we don't have to, right, is this stuff, right? Interstellar, what's the point of the film Interstellar? It's actually imagining anything at all will help right now, because all those people in that global warming world are so beaten down, they can't even think like a few seconds into the future anymore. And I know what that's like because I suffer from depression. And when you have very strong depression, you can't imagine the future. You can hardly even look in the past anymore. And I was so disabled at that point when I had it really bad a few years ago that I think my temporality was smaller than the cat. Right? Even the cat was less scared than me because the cat could imagine a little bit more into the future. Right, and that's what the art thing is for.
It's just opening up the possibility of a future for us.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. And, you know, it's in Laura Mvula. You know, I'm making friends with Laura Mvula right now because I'm writing this book about her. And about... It's
the
also
artist
about
we just heard, yes.
It's also about abortions and Satan and Blake and stuff. All the stuff that, you know, evangelical Christians will love when they find out that
I'm sure it will be a bestseller in the Deep South.
I write banned books. This is my Sid Vicious kind of, this is my, you know, Johnny Rotten, I hate Pink Floyd type of a thing.
It all starts with ambition, Tim. Yeah. Well, we'll look out for that.
So Laura's music, right? So she's saying, how can you dance with the devil on your back? Which is, you know, it's a rhetorical question, right? Like, how can I possibly imagine the future being different? Right, dance. When I'm so oppressed by everything. On the other hand, it's also a genuine question. Please, can you tell me the dance moves to make now that the devil's on my back? And a 1, and a 2, and a 3. So it's kind of both at the same time, what William Blake would call a song of experience, which is jaded, disillusioned. I'm an old guy, so you should listen to me. Song of innocence, which is weaponized harmlessness. It doesn't mean ignorance. It means Greta Thunberg is song of innocence, right? You never did any harm. So you're in a very dangerous to the authorities position.
Let's get back to the soup. Talking about weaponized harmlessness, right? There was people in the Netherlands got called about stuff happening in other countries. The news was filled with it. People were really upset about these paintings getting attacked, and then they discovered there was a glass plate in front of them, but they were still upset. But there was something weaponized and harmless to those acts. Right. And we were just talking about it a bit. I was kind of stalking you in all these Just Stop Oil Zoom meetings in the past weeks, where you were also talking to, let's say, present and future activists about this. Yeah. So I want to hear your, let's say, professor of English literature, art theory, take on this. What happened there in that art space, in that kind of like secluded, separated, holy space of the museum? Did something shift? Did something happen to that idea of the white cube with these cans of soup being chucked around?
Something happened. And, you know, it's called art, actually. One of the great things about this action is artists have been doing this, guys. So, you know, Brian Eno pees in the urinal of Duchamp to announce the onset of postmodernism, right? John Ruskin, 1850s, he goes around England with some paint and Turner paintings, they're behind the glass, and he paints over them to show you about the pollution. Yeah? Andy Warhol, I am a can of soup. Van Gogh himself might as well have been painting with soup, right? Like you get a big, thick kind of paint there and slaps it on the canvas. And this whole difference we have between food and art and disgusting and beautiful and, you know, tasteful and not tasteful, all these distinctions kind of collapsing in this work of art called throwing soup onto a Van Gogh painting, right? And in particular, of course, as you know, adults are pouring something much worse than soup over their kids who aren't behind glass. And that's the point of the action. And do you know what? It really works. Because I spent 6 years trying to ban gasoline leaf blowers and gardening stuff in my neighborhood, failing. And in my neighborhood, who controls it is the Menil collection. You know, they do the Rothko Chapel and they have a lot of Magritte paintings. It's a very amazing museum and everyone goes in there because it's free. I've been tweeting at them and writing to them for years. I've been like, look, you know, since the art museum and the Botanic Garden are going to be the same thing really soon, like people are doing lots of art actually now with plants and growing and very sadly, of course, with extinction, they're going to be the same thing, right? So why don't you get out in front of this issue and stop using gasoline? Also, I didn't do any gardening at all and I made my garden re-wild for like 3 years, right? Then I tweeted to them on that day, and I said, look, you know, your leaf blowers are pouring are elongated soup cans that are pouring carbon soup over flowers that are not behind glass. 5 hours later, they stopped it. Thanks, Just Stop Oil. Once there's 6 years versus 5 hours with the magic power of Just Stop Oil, and that's how powerful that action was.
Wow.
Because it had the crucial, what's the gate? Where's the hyperspace gateway to the future? Where's the gateway? In a way, it's the meaninglessness. The fact that you don't understand it yet-ness of the whole thing is correlated to the future, right? Which is another reason why to contain always some kind of, what was the most threatening band in Czechoslovakia in the 1970s? What was the most threatening one? It wasn't the agit pop one that did all the protest songs. It was the psychedelic one. Why does Pussy Riot get thrown in jail?
Yeah.
Right? They're trying to control the nonsense level that Putin's controlling with his conceptual artist right-hand guy, right? So you know, it's so important that they did this. It was a work of art, you know. And you know, one of my favorite things ever said, Picasso in an art museum in Spain, Guernica, Gestapo officer standing there. Who did that? You did.
Yeah, thanks for that. I just got my sign, so we're going into our end game together. The party is coming to an end almost. Let's end on something post-human, something more than human. I love this quote of yours that you say that the potential for being ecological in art is opening up to a non-anthropocentrically normative world of beauty, openness, and wonder. And what I hear in that is the potential for the re-enchantment of the world. Could you talk to us a bit about the art that you love that opens up the world for you now, for us to leave with?
If you're looking for recommendations for great stuff, I might be the worst person you ever talk to. Because to relax, you know, I watch Doctor Who mostly. You know, I can tell you everything you want to know about the TARDIS and all the companions and all that jazz and what's the greatest episode ever, you know, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I find it quite hard to recommend art. Not that I don't understand it and love it and sort of actually do it as well.
Well, but Tim, I mean, obviously we could exchange lists, but what I'm curious about is how it makes you feel.
Oh, wow.
This kind of art. If you can go to that space of experiencing it and share that with us.
It was a wonderful experience, that action of what I like about art, which is not understanding it. You know, understanding is overrated. Take it from somebody who's called clever, right? That it's overrated. And when Socrates says, I'm an idiot, please trust him. He's not just jerking you around. He's actually saying, I am an idiot. Yeah? And the nicest thing ever said to me was Slavoj Žižek a few months ago. He said, you're not, for you, I reserve my highest compliment. You are not a complete idiot. You know, the talent. Yeah. And I'm like, Slavoj, can you put this on the back of my books now for the rest of time? Because that's like the gold. This is better than payment or like promotion or anything. This is like, Timothy Morton is not a complete idiot.
That's lovely, Tim. I think this leaves us equally confused and inspired and elucidated. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Tim, for getting the Eco Party started yet again. Let's give you a big hand.
Thank you, Amsterdam. Love you.
Thank you all for joining tonight. Speaking of parties, there will be another one at the Kring, just, I hope I'm pointing in the right direction, across the Leidse Square with Joost van Bellen, etc. at 8, right there on the screen. If you feel like another kind of happening, you can check out the Brainwash container on the Leidseplein, where you can process all of your brainwashing today into a personal action plan. So go forth and multiply.